Hi everyone, Jim here. Before we get into the episode, I did want to give you a brief update on what's happening with the Haunted Walk. Our last evening of tours was Sunday, March 15th, and since that point, all of our tours have been suspended, and likely will be for the foreseeable future. With no revenues coming in and fixed costs that we have to pay, most notably rent, and no tours to offer our tour guides, we made the decision to lay off our entire tour guide team, close to 100 people. Now, we did this partially because we didn't have shifts for them, but we also knew that they would be able to access benefits quicker, the faster we laid them off, and the writing was obviously on the wall. Now, we really do consider our tour guides like part of our family. Many of them we have worked with for years, and it was perhaps the hardest day in Haunted Walk history, laying off so many of our cherished tour guides. The company is now down to just 3 of us, myself, Rowena, and our founder, Glenn. Together we've put in about 50 years working on the business, and to see it threatened by something so completely beyond our control is extremely challenging. But we have been taking all the steps that we can, cutting any services that we're not going to need while the shutdown is going on, trying to get involved in all of the programs being offered federally, provincially, or locally to try to give us the best shot to be able to reopen, rehire the tour guides once it is safe to do so. And first and foremost, to be able to give tours again, because it really is what we love doing. So we plan to fight, and we think we have a fighting chance. If you're interested in supporting the Haunted Walk, I've gotten quite a few emails. We are limited, obviously, in what we can do right now, but on our website, hauntedwalk.com, you can buy gift certificates anywhere in the world. Even if you don't plan on actually visiting us anytime soon, those gift certificates can almost be considered like a donation, and we can use that money as a little bit of revenue to apply to the costs that occur every month, whether we're giving tours or not. Also on the homepage, we've recently opened an online gift shop where if you're in Canada, you can order one of our new home and board rescue packs, which is full of a bunch of Haunted Walk books, merchandise, some books by other authors, and a bunch of surprises. So hauntedwalk.com, and you can find either of those means to support us there, and we are extremely grateful for any support you can provide. Secondly, about the future of the podcast. It is my intent to keep the podcast going. I know it's been a while since the last episode, but it's been a little hard to concentrate. But we will be having new podcast episodes coming out to give you a little entertainment and, of course, maybe a bit of a chill as we all collectively try to work through this crisis. And I think a great way to start that is with today's episode, which is coming out on April 15th, which does mark the anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. Now, last summer we released this episode, and it is perhaps the episode I am most proud of, as it involves the most original research that we had to do about a very particular and sticky problem, which is how do you disprove or prove an urban legend that seemingly has no proof? And we looked specifically at the sinking of the Titanic and the very popular urban legend in Ottawa that furniture destined for the opening of the Château Laurier, a very famous hotel here, went down on the Titanic. So we dove deep into that for several months, myself and Ezra Bedeau, who was our intern at the time. And I think it's a great way to kind of kick the podcast off again. Hope you enjoy the episode, and you will be hearing from us soon. Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of the Haunted Walk, offering ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario. My name is Jim Dean, joining you live in the studio today from the Haunted Walk head office in Ottawa, and as always, it is a pleasure to have you with us for the show. Because today in particular, we are going to break some very big news. Standing next to Parliament Hill in Ottawa is a grand hotel with beautiful high limestone walls, sculpted exterior, and a green copper roof. Built in the style of the French castles which dot the Loire Valley, this is the Château Laurier, a mock fortress that has served Ottawa well for over a century. Numerous prime ministers, members of parliament, and foreign dignitaries have visited or stayed in the hotel. Debutantes were introduced to society, brides photographed on the terrace, and many state dinners have been held in the ballroom. Over the years, the hotel has not just been a place to spend the night, but an important part of Ottawa's social life. It is also a place of great mystery. The hotel has been a regular stop on our original Haunted Walk of Ottawa for close to 25 years. Guests have reported ghostly experiences there, and many of these experiences have taken place on the 5th floor, which also happens to be home to the Charles Hayes Suite, whose namesake will play a pivotal role in our story. It is more than just a haunted landmark, though. It is a source of legend and myth. Every city has its fair share of folklore, from the alligators of the New York sewer system to the corpse of ex-mobster Jimmy Hoffa locked forever in the concrete confines of New Jersey's Giant Stadium. The Château Laurier, too, holds its own secrets. We, at the Haunted Walk, have been looking extensively into one of them, having to do with a railway tycoon, dining room furniture, and a cold night in April of 1912. And we believe we have solved the mystery. Charles Melville Hayes, the second vice president and general manager of the Grand Trunk Railroad and president of its subsidiary, the Grand Trunk Pacific, is standing on the rapidly tilting deck of the Titanic, surprised that no one has shown up yet to rescue him and the others still trapped on the sinking vessel. Ironically, Hayes was reported to have said just hours before the accident that the race to build larger and faster steamships would eventually lead to disaster at sea. It is no mystery that Charles Hayes and 1,516 others perished that night in the cold Atlantic. He was survived by his wife and daughter, who were able to secure a place on one of the lifeboats. The mystery lies far below deck, where, according to legend, a critical shipment bound for the opening of the Château Laurier in Ottawa was rapidly being engulfed in water. Not only was this a tragedy for Hayes and the Grand Trunk Railroad, but his beloved railway hotel, which was just weeks away from its grand opening. In the past few decades, there has been a growing urban legend that dining room furniture destined for the Château Laurier and personally selected by Hayes sank with the Titanic. It is a narrative that has been reinforced by several historical blogs and in newspaper reports, and as of our recording date, can still be found on Fairmont Hotels and Resorts' corporate website. We've been providing walking tours that have included the hotel for close to 25 years. And despite the growing popularity of this legend, we have never been comfortable enough to share it with our guests because of a lack of evidence. This summer, we decided to try to prove once and for all if this claim about the hotel has any merit. After 3 months of research, we are now prepared to share our results. A question you may have is, does it really matter if furniture meant for the Château Laurier really went down on the Titanic? We think it does, because the history of the hotel, Hayes, and the Titanic are already fascinating enough and don't require embellishment. Just like with the ghost stories on our tours, the most compelling tales are the ones that can be best verified through evidence whether anecdotal or archival. To fully understand the mystery, we must discuss the hotel's construction and a little bit about Hayes. Ground was broken on Ottawa's famous hotel on October 28, 1907. It would become one of a long line of Canada's grand railway hotels. It was connected by tunnel to its sibling project, Union Station, which presently houses Canada's Senate, while Centre Block is under construction. The Château Laurier was the brainchild of Charles Melville Hayes, the general manager of the Grand Trunk Railroad, and it was built as part of Hayes' expansion plans to better compete with the Canadian Pacific, a major rival railroad. Hayes, a busy man, was also in the midst of commanding the construction of the Grand Trunk's Pacific Main Line between the east and west coasts of Canada. Through this period, he was dealing with strikes, surveyors, and struggles to finance his dream of a truly Canadian transcontinental railway. The Château Laurier opening was delayed several weeks to June 3, 1912, under a great pall of tragedy, brought about by the untimely and tragic death of Hayes in the Titanic sinking. In the decade after his passing, his beloved Grand Trunk Railroad would be nationalized starting in 1919 and would be reborn in 1923 as the Canadian National, or CN for short. CN saw its enduring value and funded a major renovation of the hotel in 1929, which maintained and expanded the original chateau style. It is the version of the Château Laurier that graces the Rideau Canal and downtown Ottawa today. CN's hotel fortunes faded in the late 80s, and the hotel was ironically sold to the Grand Trunk's ancient rival, the Canadian Pacific, or CP, in 1988. CP would go on to sell the hotel in 1999, this time to Fairmont Hotels and Resorts, who continue to own the building today, and under whose auspices the hotel has recently made the news over their very controversial expansion plans. It is against the backdrop of this famous hotel that our grim tale is set. In 1912, Hayes commanded the Grand Trunk Railroad, one of Canada's premier corporations. He was not an interior decorator. He was a trained tactician. He definitely did make a business trip to Britain that year. He wined and dined with Europe's richest tycoons. In fact, that is precisely why he was in England to begin with. He was there to increase the Grand Trunk's profits and integrate it into a wider transportation network. He disagreed with the Grand Trunk's board of directors, who wished to run a stable company rather than a dynamic one. Hayes, on the other hand, wanted to accrue considerably more capital through his expansionist strategies. It was specifically to get that cash that he traveled to Britain in 1912. Once in Britain, he fell ill and was forced to convalesce at the Smithers Estate, one of the Grand Trunk's board members' private residence, located just outside of London. This meant that he could not travel across the Channel to vacation with his family, who were exploring Paris, while Hayes struggled to conduct his business affairs in London. Hayes wanted and received an audience with J. Bruce Ismay, the head of White Star Lines, a prestigious and powerful transatlantic steamship company which had just finished building the world's largest ocean liner, Titanic. The charismatic Hayes so enthralled Ismay that the White Star president offered him a nearly free ticket to travel with him for Titanic's maiden voyage. The railway baron accepted and immediately modified his travel plans at the last minute, canceling his departing tickets on another ship from Cherbourg, France. Hayes canceled within 3 days of his travel date out of Cherbourg. Instead, he departed with his wife Clara out of Southampton, England, on April 10, 1912. Meanwhile, his daughter and son-in-law joined the Titanic off the coast of Cherbourg later that same day. If Hayes had bought furniture and was originally booked to travel with it out of Cherbourg, and he ended up changing his travel plans only 3 days before the Titanic was to sail, how likely and possible is it that Hayes would change the travel plans of the furniture as well? Would 3 days be enough time to get the furniture to Southampton, England, and load it onto the Titanic? And if we assume that it is logistically possible, and there was still space available in the cargo hold so soon prior to departure, the cost of moving crates of furniture on such short notice would have been considerable, especially compared to the alternative, simply shipping it out of Cherbourg as originally planned. Now, Titanic buffs out there might correctly point out the Titanic did stop at Cherbourg, which is 100% true. But Titanic was served by a pair of smaller vessels which shuttled passengers from the port to the vessel, as she did not stay in port there. All of her cargo loading had been done in Southampton. The timeline is also very problematic, as the Château Laurier's grand opening was scheduled for April 26th. The Titanic was scheduled to arrive in New York City on April 17th. That is a very tight window to get the furniture shipped from New York to Ottawa, assembled and dressed out on the dining room floor for the grand opening. Rather than Charles Hayes, it is much more likely that Frederick W. Bergman had more to do with the chateau's furniture. After all, he was in charge of the hotel's interior design and was handpicked by Hayes for that job. In fact, Bergman did more than just pick out the furnishings. He also designed and patented a host of interior decorations, from the hotel's logo to its teapots. He worked to create a unified and useful interior design to match the gorgeous exterior of the building. It would have been more Bergman's responsibility than Hayes to worry about the furniture. I'd like to bring in our lead researcher on the project, Ezra Badeau, who is currently completing his MA in History at Carleton University. Ezra has been working behind the scenes at Haunted Talks for a few months, but this is the first time in front of the mic. Ezra, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
The first question I have for you is kind of a top-level question, having to do with the Titanic itself. Was there any furniture being transported in the cargo hold of the Titanic?
Was there furniture on the Titanic? Yes. There was one shipment. This is where some of the more recent confusion comes from, as the Baumgarten Company was shipping furniture on the Titanic to their offices in New York City. That company was famous for its interior design, and had already done several major hotels, and was busy preparing to furnish Toronto's Casa Loma. In contrast, there is no evidence to tie the Baumgarten Company to the Château Laurier. When Baumgarten worked on the Casa Loma, for example, it was widely reported in the news, as the company was so well respected that it became a point of prestige. Therefore, had Baumgarten worked on the Château Laurier, we would expect it to have been covered in the local papers, but there is no mention of them in the Ottawa papers in the years leading up to and directly after the hotel's construction. Furthermore, there were only 2 cases of furniture on the Titanic from Baumgarten, hardly enough to furnish the hotel's massive dining spaces. More recent publications, and the Encyclopedia Titanica, have an unfortunate misprint, thanks to smudged ink on a New York Times article published the day after the tragedy, which carried a transcript of the ship's manifest. The article lists 2 crates, but due to an errant ink smudge, later transcribed versions of the manifest list 3 crates, as found on Encyclopedia Titanica. Even if there were 3 cases, the question remains whether or not that would be enough to furnish the hotel's multiple spacious dining rooms. Other than this one furniture shipment to New York, there is nothing else on the manifest resembling dining room furniture, and nothing at all on the manifest destined for the Château Laurier, let alone Ottawa.
Part of the urban legend is that the opening of the hotel was delayed due to a lack of dining room furniture. In your research, did you find anything to verify that?
The hotel was open late, just as the myth suggests, but that delay was because the company had just lost its visionary head. To the GT and GTP, Hayes was more than just a mere mortal. He was a railway dreamer, and he was the main proponent of the Grand Trunk's expansion. He was a railway baron, juggling surveyors' reports, corresponding with Sir Wilfrid Laurier himself, dishing out jobs, contracts, and all sorts of schemes. His loss was a major blow. Initially, the scale of the Titanic disaster was a point of speculation. However, within 24 hours, it was clear that the Titanic herself was a total loss, and with her perished many of her passengers. For the Grand Trunk, the loss of Hayes was more than just an emotional tragedy. The death of the company's president could sway stock prices and affect the company's fiscal forecasts. Therefore, it was lucky for the company that Hayes was initially listed as missing. It would only be weeks later that his frozen corpse would be fished out of the icy Atlantic on April 26th, long after the disaster. His body was returned to his home in Montreal in his personal train, headed by one of his beloved steam locomotives. The Château Laurier, train station, and GT ticket office downtown in Ottawa, near where our own ticket office on Spark Street is today, were all draped in dreary purple funerary garb. On the morning of April 25, 1912, every single locomotive along every single track of the GT and GTP in both Canada and the United States slid to a silent halt. Huge steam engines, shuddering with energy, were tamed to honor their dead master. No train departed, and no train would officially arrive during the minutes of silence in memoriam of Hayes. The next day, as Hayes' body was fished out of the murky water, the grim purple drapings on the new Union Station in Ottawa caught fire, adding another layer of dreariness to the sad occasion. Hayes' funerary car can still be visited at the Canadian Railway Museum in St. Constant, Quebec.
What do we know about Hayes? Could he be the type of person to go on a wild hunt for tables?
On a personal level, furniture was not Hayes' forte. Based on correspondence between Hayes and Prime Minister Sir Wilfrid Laurier, and Hayes and his business partners, it is clear that his primary concern was big-picture financial deals and route expansions. The Château Laurier was only a small element of a grand strategy of transcontinental railway domination. In fact, even more important to Hayes' strategy was the hotel's architectural sibling, the Ottawa Union Station, which was to be Ottawa's new Grand Trunk rail terminus, controlling the right-of-way, determining the trackage, and rail-sharing agreements more regularly appeared in Hayes' correspondence than the hotel itself.
And as far as the myth itself, were you able to kind of pinpoint how it first came about?
It was only nearly a century later that the myth of sunken furniture appeared. After browsing through around 150 newspapers which referenced the Chateau or Hayes, the theory that furniture bound for the hotel rests with the Titanic only begins to be referenced in the newspaper archives starting in the 1990s, almost 80 years later after the tragedy. The first report that mentions the furniture coincided with when the Canadian Pacific began to offer free tours of the chateau. It is possible that in order to embellish the chateau's story, that a tour guide added some extra contextual what-ifs to further tie the sinking to the hotel. After all, the initial myth is only a simple addition to the genuine history of Hayes' death. Like a runaway train, the story took a life of its own. Over the next 2 decades, further embellishments occurred. In particular, that the Baumgarten Interior Design Company's crates of furniture had anything to do with the chateau. And secondly, that Hayes himself was at all involved in sourcing hotel furniture. Incidentally, the Ottawa Citizen had done an in-depth exploration of the hotel's history only 3 years before, in 1987, and in that article there was no mention of sunken furniture. The story is also noticeably absent from other written histories of the hotel. Therefore, the urban legend was likely to have arisen between 1987 and 1990. Our investigation found no link between any furniture on the Titanic and the Château Laurier. Furthermore, the chronology of Hayes' journey to England was not conducive to furniture shopping, as his change of transit plans would have affected the furniture too. So even if he did buy furniture in England, for which there is no evidence, it would have likely made the transatlantic journey from Cherbourg rather than from Southampton. According to Hayes' Titanic ticket, no mention of extraneous furniture is transcribed, and in the Titanic's cargo manifest, there is no specific reference to the GT, Château Laurier, or Charles Melville Hayes himself. Therefore, The hunt for the furniture became a matter of searching for whatever shadow that the furniture would leave on the financial records of the GT or its subsidiaries.
You've had the opportunity to go through many of these documents from the Grand Trunk and other sources. What did you find?
The primary purpose of Hayes' trip was to convince the GT board that his Grand Trunk Pacific Transcontinental Railway was worth further investment. In order to reinforce his argument, he was networking to establish links with steamship tycoons, such as Ismay, in order to synergize the railway line to transatlantic shipping organically, providing his railroads with a competitive advantage over other major transcontinental operators. The actual subsidiary in charge of Ottawa's Union Station and the construction of the hotel was the Ottawa Terminal Railway, of which Hayes was, of course, president. The OTR's documentation concerning board meetings revealed that there was a special meeting held to replace Hayes, the president of the company, but no further losses are mentioned. The OTR minutes book, which also recorded the company's budget, does not register a sudden change in funding of the hotel around the time of the sinking. Therefore, the company likely did not lose anything other than its head. If assets had been lost, the minutes book would have registered a sudden increase in expenses for the Château Laurier. However, the record is completely silent on this matter. Finally, the OTR and Hayes' own family did not take out any insurance claims related to the sinking. All signs in this case point to no relation between the crates of furniture that were on the Titanic and the construction and opening of the Château Laurier.
The CP sold the Château Laurier to Fairmont Hotels in 1999, marking the end of railway ownership for the hotel after nearly a century. The chateau has metamorphosized from a practical extension of a railway empire into a luxurious and historic landmark, which adds to the beauty of the parliamentary precinct in Ottawa. The woes of its construction and opening have long since been buried in the bowels of Library and Archives Canada, and largely forgotten or incorrectly mythologized into the present narrative. With the snipping of one mythological bud, the present narrative can come closer to connecting to the honest past. It is high time that the myth finally be dispelled with some evidence, and focus can return to the life of Charles Melville Hayes, the sinking of the Titanic, and Ottawa's incredible castle, the Château Laurier. Ezra, as you've spent all summer looking at this topic, I'd love to get your final thoughts on the legend.
While the urban legend may be exciting, I believe it holds no water. The company in charge of the hotel's budget made absolutely no mention of lost furniture and no mention of replacements. Hayes did not have much time to go furniture shopping in Britain between his sickness and the amount of business he actually had to conduct. Even if he did, this task would be far below his station. Critically, we can trace the earliest mention of the myth, and it only comes from a newspaper article in 1990. Surely, if this had occurred, someone would have mentioned the story in the intervening 8 decades. There is always a chance some incredible new evidence will appear to back up the legend, though I seriously doubt it exists after the depth of my research. Therefore, given all the newly gathered evidence, I believe it is extremely unlikely, almost to the point of certainty, that dining room furniture destined for the opening of the Château Laurier in Ottawa went down with the Titanic.
A big thank you to Ezra for joining us for today's show. And Ezra, this kind of ends your summer internship at the Haunted Walk. It's been great to have you on the team, and I hope you've had fun as well.
It was a great honor. Thank you very much.
As always, special thanks to our Haunted Talks team, including Ezra, our audio editor, Michelle Dennis, and Kevin McLeod at Incompetech.com. Information about all our tours and experiences, including those Halloween adventures you're not going to want to miss, can be found on our website, which is hauntedwalk.com. And don't forget, as a Haunted Talks listener, you can use the promo code Haunted Talks, all one word, Haunted Talks at checkout to get 15% off your tickets. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all 3 at Haunted Walk. And if you're enjoying the episodes, be sure to subscribe, and we always love getting a 5-star review from you. We would love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Do you find the case as compelling as we do? If so, we'd love to connect with you on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all three at Haunted Walk. And if you're enjoying the episodes, be sure to subscribe, and we always love getting a 5-star review. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.